Big game on the weekend. Man City against Newcastle United. Newcastle United looking to bounce back after that Carabao Cup final defeat to Manchester United, taking on the other side of Manchester. When it comes to Newcastle United, it's one of those, we do this a lot, don't we? We throw a lot of opinions out there, and when one starts to stick, you want to celebrate that fact. But I don't really want to do that, because I kind of said 2 months ago, Newcastle are tense up. When they were right in the middle of that sort of hot streak, it felt too hot for me. And it kind of feels like it's proving right. Hugh, you were at that Carabao Cup final, huge game. Here's a question for you. Do you think that they felt the pressure of where they're sort of heading, Newcastle?
Not necessarily. I think they felt the pressure of that cup final for sure. And Eddie Howe, he did say afterwards, we tried our absolute best as a coaching staff to not let the final affect the players. And I'm disappointed to say it did, basically. Because it was so huge for Newcastle United. This is a team that hadn't won a major domestic trophy since 1955. Hadn't won a trophy of any description since the late 60s. It was huge for that football club. Their support was absolutely magnificent in the stadium. You could tell, I'm from London, live in London, just what it was like the few days before that final. They took over the city pretty much, what it meant to that football club. And I do think that affected the players. Basically, they need to score more goals. Defensively, they haven't been that bad over the last 4 or 5 weeks. But their attacking fluency is lacking. And obviously, you're going to need that if you're going to beat Manchester City. In my opinion, you need to score at least 2 goals to beat Manchester City. So where's that going to come from? Because Callum Wilson hasn't delivered at the moment. Alexander Isak has come in fits and starts. He hasn't really yet moulded himself within this team. And then you haven't got the players who were chipping in with goals earlier on in the season. Miggy Almiron stopped scoring at the moment. Joe Willock isn't playing as much as he was before. So in that area, I'm most concerned about Newcastle. Actually, defensively, Nick Pope should return in goal as well. I haven't been too concerned with them. Actually, they're really well coached, really solid team. And that's why we've seen them get a few clean sheets or a few 1-1 draws. Yeah. And actually what they need to do is just make sure if they score a couple of goals in a game, they're likely to win against anyone because their defence has been so good this season. It's just solving that conundrum on the goal-scoring front.
So this is the worst game, isn't it, really, for Newcastle, kind of away from home, of course. The game at St James's Park, I think you saw the best of that kind of fire and energy that there has been in Newcastle this year. I totally agree with you. I felt like the occasion got to a few of them, and then they were a little bit too open. Man United were quite clinical. And then from there as well, although they sort of huffed and puffed, the sort of quality to get those goals and engineer those goals, aside from getting the ball to Trippier and Trippier looking to put a cross in, or Alan Saint-Maximin trying to do something without the output that you really want to see from someone who's as exciting as Alan Saint-Maximin. Are they sort of feeling it a little bit? And if they are feeling it a little bit, the sort of the tension of the opportunity that's in their faces, what needs to be done to kind of solve it for them? Like how do they get moving, certainly in terms of scoring goals, in a better way?
I think a few things have happened to Newcastle. I think football's all about timing. I think a few things have happened to Newcastle at the wrong time. Look, getting to the cup final was a great achievement, but I do feel like the players went within themselves a little bit because they want to be part of that occasion. You might not want to get injured. You might not want to miss that game. Guimaraes, he could have ended up missing that game through suspension. So the Newcastle players will have seen how close that would have been. Nick Pope's ended up missing the game through suspension. So I think as players, sometimes you protect yourself knowing that there's a cup final coming up because it was such a big occasion. They're still outperforming where they should be, Newcastle. Newcastle don't really have a right to be sitting fifth in the league. They're ahead of schedule. Eddie Howe's done a magnificent job. It's built on that solid platform of having the defence. But like Hugh says, they were winning a lot of games because Almiron was scoring goals. Those goals have dried up now. They had that nice combination of Almiron, Wilson. I think Joel Linton was playing a lot of times on the left-hand side. Now, I love watching Saint-Maximin because he's just a fun player to watch. But sometimes I think he's a bit too individual and he takes away from the team. So him actually playing at the moment, I don't know whether that's a good thing for Newcastle, but they've had injuries, they've had players missing. It's been very difficult for them. So I just think the timing of a few things for Newcastle has been wrong. Even playing Manchester United, it came at the wrong time for Newcastle because their form had been a bit patchy. and they took on Manchester United at a time when they were absolutely riding the crest of a wave. So it feels as things have gone against them at the same time, Newcastle. But I think they'll be back. I do think top four is maybe beyond them. The other thing I would say is, we were talking earlier about Arsenal and how they acted in January. Did Newcastle do enough in January to consolidate where they were and improve? They brought in Anthony Gordon, might go on to be a great player for them, but I don't think he was the area where they needed reinforcements. And I just think Newcastle maybe didn't do enough in January to keep themselves in the top four.
I think in terms of positives, though, just to turn it a little bit before all the Newcastle United fans turn off, no, I do believe that. I think you made some good points there in terms of what could be, beneficial for Newcastle. One being, we are the other side of that cup final now.
Yeah.
I think it can be sort of one that you can kind of draw a line. This game's a bit of a free hit for them, really, isn't it? I know they want to be securing points to stay in that fight. But really, away from home to Man City, it's like, get what you can. And you spoke about Bruno Guimaraes missing those 3 games before. I don't think they won a league game when he's not been playing.
He's irreplaceable, isn't he, in that midfield?
Exactly. So him being back in the side, St Maximin as well, if we go back to that game at the start of the season, I think you're right. I think he goes down sort of cul-de-sacs sometimes and has got his head down, so isn't looking to find those passes, and it's already a congested area because he often cuts inside instead of goes to the byline. But against Man City, he gave a torrid time, and they had a real go. Do you think that's going to be important for Newcastle, even away from home, to have a bit of a go at Man City?
Do you know, having a bit of a go and how you do that? I was 2-0 up, but watching the Carabao Cup final, I'm saying to the person beside me, why aren't Newcastle going direct? They still had loads of possession. They were still passing it nicely, trying to work an opportunity. They were shooting towards their own fans. And I was like, are they going to try and cause some havoc at any point in time? They got Isak up there. They've got Wilson on at the time. They had both of them. And I was like, why aren't they just like... I know it sounds incredibly poor from a coaching perspective to say, why aren't they launching it? But as in, why aren't they being more direct? Sure. Because I do think Eddie Howe wants them to be a side that plays fluent football, that wants to create chances. But at times, especially when you're going through a period of a dry spell, where that plan A is not working, I don't mind there being a different plan B. Like if Eddie Howe says, this is what we're going to do, we're going to play wing backs, we're going to do something totally different to try and create goal scoring opportunities. Brilliant, fine. But what I'm saying is they never really produced that plan B, whatever it is. And for me, in that game from 2 goals down, when it got to 10 minutes left, that's when I was saying, look, go more direct. But ultimately, going into a game here against Manchester City, where you haven't been scoring goals, he needs to come up with that recipe in terms of maybe do we switch formation slightly? Do we do something where we get 2 strikers on the pitch and we can get more bodies in the box? That needs to happen. It's 4 goals in the last, 2 goals in the last 4 Premier League games. The XG during that time has been 5.62, which actually also means maybe we're just not finishing our chances because they've had a significant number there of good quality chances. And it's just not working out for them at the moment. But I disagree that they won't be in the Champions League. I think they probably will. This has been a blip. They haven't been losing every week. If they can get back to the form that they found earlier in the season, they're going to be a very tough side to stop. Tottenham Hotspur at this point in time aren't really doing it. Are Liverpool going to get that consistent form? I'm not sure. So I think they still got a very good opportunity.
I'm fascinated to see how this one plays out because for Man City, of course, for them, trying to get themselves, to the top of the league, the games that they've conceded points, the likes of Everton, Nottingham Forest, a lot of teams that I think it's 8 times they've dropped points, which is very un-Man City-like. And it's often against sort of the other guys and the guys that kind of are able to sit back or find a way to sort of make them that little bit more sort of defensively impotent. Newcastle, I'm intrigued to see with what went well in that first game, but was roared on by the crowd. Is that sort of something that Man City would want to see? Them come and have a go at it? Or should Eddie Howe be a bit more conservative in his approach? Maybe play 2 up front, or maybe play, Almiron, who they try and do that a little bit to get him up there, but literally leave him up there to allow them to sort of have that space on the counter-attack.
Well, first off, that game feels like it was about 10 years ago.
Doesn't it?
It was one of the games of the season, wasn't it?
Because Haaland it was one of those where you're like, ooh, Haaland's good.
Yeah. But that day, Newcastle pressed Man City very high. They were winning the ball back high up the pitch, and they were really harnessing the atmosphere of St James's Park. I'm not convinced they're going to be able to do exactly the same thing and replicate that away at Manchester City. But I think Joel Linton is the key player wherever he ends up playing on the pitch because he's very capable of that high press. And we have seen Man City in certain games games this season, they've been susceptible for that. They've given the ball away in dangerous areas and been punished. You think of the Spurs home game. I know they went on to win that. But, you know, if Newcastle can get themselves ahead, they've shown all season that the one thing they can do, and the one thing we probably didn't expect Eddie Howe to be able to do, is they've got that strong defence. They've still got the best defensive record in the Premier League. So if maybe Newcastle can press high early on, catch Manchester City out and get that goal, there is an avenue to win that game. We've seen Manchester City tripped up this season.
I think the intensity is key as well, because Guardiola's kind of mentioned it throughout the season that on too many occasions they haven't produced what they have before. But what he's alluding to is the passion, the fire, the desire. He's called from it from his fans at the Etihad as well, saying things aren't quite the same. And then the end result is seeing a lot of key players last season often on the bench, the likes of Laporte on the bench, Diaz on the bench, Foden on the bench, Gundogan, Silva, regularly seeing them on the bench has been a surprise. I think if Eddie Howe says, look, this is how we hurt them before, we were all over them, we were more intense, let's give our fans something to sing about after last weekend, let's go to the Etihad, let's go and win this game. If they can be intense and do exactly what Dan mentioned there, I think that could help.
I think the one thing as well, another thing, maybe I'm sort of alluding to my prediction, because when I do think about this game, I think Newcastle get something, I think they
score.
A draw.
They score.
Because the other thing is that often with Man City, it's got to the point where it's like, we're struggling here. You've got Grealish and Mahrez coming back into trouble, or at least safety for the defensive unit, and they're getting the ball to De Bruyne and going, go on, can you find Haaland at the back post? Sven Botman, Dan Burn, they've got Nick Pope, they've got size. So if they are just allowing them to put crosses in, I think they'll be absolutely fine with that. So I think the defensive line is going to be really interesting in terms of Eddie Howe and what he does when they look to sort of squeeze the pitch and when they look to drop off and let them put those crosses in, because they've got that size to deal with anything that they would offer. If Man City go down a route that they did against Tottenham away from home a couple of weeks ago, it was just cross after cross, and it was kind of pointless. They've kind of moved away from that, and they've started games really, really well. So the first half of that game is going to be crucial. But I just wonder if Newcastle will sneak a draw in this one. That's my prediction.
What you've just said is quite valid there, because the way Newcastle defend, and sometimes they drop everyone behind the ball, they can funnel Manchester City out wide, and if that's what they're able to do.
Come on then, predictions. What are we saying?
I think City will probably win. I just think they're getting that confidence back, and some of those players I mentioned who have been on the bench of late, back in the side, I think proving their worth. So another victory for Man City.
It's a basic answer, but the first goal is very important in this game. If Newcastle get it, they've shown that they can defend and maybe keep their noses in front. But if City get it, Newcastle at the other end haven't been too prolific. So I think whoever scores the first goal wins the game.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.